it's very difficult to define exactly how we are, what we are, how we are doing architecture, but we got very early the idea that doing architecture was a way of providing space for uses. So it means that the uses is everything, everywhere. It can be small, it can be a little thing. And we got an interesting experience after the School of Architecture in Africa, where at the beginning we didn't have the feeling that we were in presence of architecture just after making the school. But every day it was interesting to see that people themselves was doing architecture because they were creating space with sometimes nothing, no materials. And that was very interesting for us to learn from this. It was something intuitive, but we learned a lot from this, and this became some principles afterwards in our practice that I can summarize in a few words, like generosity of space, care to the uses, care to the climate, and how we can use all the resources of the climate in order to create a natural quality of environment, of space. The economy, because economy is extremely important nowadays to make this architecture affordable in any case. So all these principles are with us since many years, and of course every year, every project allows to improve it. For us, it's very important to keep with ourselves, to keep in the project everything existing. And we consider that it's a resource, an opportunity that makes more interesting the project. Nowadays, we never work on empty space. And in fact, it's not very interesting to work on empty space. And it's, we work in the established city. We work in landscapes which are most of the time the result of changes of different periods of time. And it's for us very interesting to take in account all these elements as part of the situation, which is more interesting than starting from nothing. So it's why we take care so much to the existing, not in the way of protection or big respect or too much respect, but as a resource. And of course we try to take the maximum benefit of this resource in reusing, in transforming. Sometimes and it's starting from a great observation and inventory of what we have. It means that something needs to be transformed, something need to stay as they are, and this is all this combination which makes the project so interesting. To work and to understand architecture or urban planning as an addition of many existing coming from the past, but also with the future. It's not the fact of fixing everything. It's not the fact of not changing. It's just to take the history as an addition of layers which we don't like to select. We take everything and we try to do something with that. With correcting which is not working, with taking away which is bad, because sometimes we can find pollution, we can find dangerous things. So we take it away carefully and we just keep what is the most interesting. But most of the case, we can take a lot of advantage of the existing, and it makes a great richness. And starting from this richness is always giving more interesting projects. So for us, it's more, we don't see it as a constraint, we see it as a chance.
But not all new architecture is good architecture, but sometimes not all old architecture is good architecture, it's bad architecture. Don't you sometimes kind of feel like making a tabula rasa and starting from scratch?
Nearly never, because we always start to look at things positively. We always start looking for the good. And of course we check also, we inventory what is bad. But we cannot say that this is bad, this is good. We take it always as something existing. For example, if we work in a forest or in a very nice landscape, we take it as it is. We have never no one will have the intention to cut trees or to, someone may have, but normally we don't have. And we can consider that buildings, floors, can be also this, have this interest. So the thing is to start in looking for what is positive and make it as a whole and say, okay, we have all this positive and now we check what is negative, what is not working, and we change it, and then we can transform and we can make additions and we can make something new, we can extend, we can, but we are never in the situation of making a tabula rasa if there is no good reason to make it. There could be a reason, for example, if there is an extremely great pollution that you cannot treat. Of course, it could be a case where you can ask yourself, should I keep the... But in any case, even if sometimes you can have a weak structure, you can reinforce it. So it's always a very clear, detailed observation on ground, on the site, and an observation and inventory case by case, detail by detail. And it's why we think that architecture must be done, urban planning must be done from the inside. It's part of the most important elements of the architecture, making space where it's interesting to stay, with the pleasure to stay. It means that the view is important, the light is important, to get sun is important, and space, because it comes from the observation that most of the time the housing is very small, very constraining for the family life. So making this transformation, instead of restructuring everything inside, we find better to keep as it is, but to make an addition of space. And both the existing, which is the constraints of the walls of everything, and this open space in front creates a new space which has more qualities. And in the same time, we also bring solutions to thermal improvement, to energy saving, but it's done not only with materials and technology, it's done with space. So that's this addition, the word addition is for us extremely important. Never withdraw, always add. The feeling you have when we come into a place, whatever the place is extremely important, and we can consider that at the moment you have a special feeling, you start to understand in your own way the soul of the building. But in fact, this is not in itself the only goal to keep the soul of the building, because we are in the life, and the soul of a building is kind of history, is a kind of past. But it's important that all these layers of the history can stay. So it's why we try to keep this history, this soul, the space, but we also want to add another one. We want to add also to bring a new life and a new freedom and the capacity and the opportunity to create something new inside. So it's why we are never in a kind of too big admiration of the past, and we look at it, we appreciate it, but we want to bring it in the present and in the future.
Mm-hmm. Here in Denmark, we know that it's not only the houses and the buildings, but it's the spaces around. So a building is within the context of the space around it. How important is space for you, public space?
It's of course important. No building is in the middle of nowhere. You are always neighbors, landscape, city landscape, and everything around. It's extremely important. But to our opinion, this public space should always start from the interior of the living space. Because the public space must be understood as a place of connections. And it's important for us finally at the opposite of the principle of starting by a master plan. For us it's important to start from the opposite way. It means starting from the living space, living for yourself, living for a community, living as a public use. But to start from this space which is used at the scale of the people, and then to understand which is the next space, which is the next, and then to create a kind of agglomeration of space where the question of relations is extremely important, and the public space is part of this system. For us, it's very important to when you were talking about this transformation of modernist housing, and for us it's why we are doing like that, because it's important not to consider it as blocks, but to start from one flat and to start from the improvement of one flat. And we consider that when we have made one flat better, we can think to the neighborhood of 2 flats, 3 flats, and then what's the entrance of the building, and then what is in front of the building, and then what is the relation with the next building. It's for us an interesting way of making the city, which again we think that it's an opposite way of making the master plan, because master plan is a very large scale, and it comes step by step to the small scale. And the architecture is, in this situation, the very last fragment of the large scale, while the architecture should be the scale of the life. So it's why we are convinced that nowadays the urban planning should be made by both sides at the same time, simultaneously. The large scale, because the large scale is the scale of the networks, of the big connections, of the great equipments, but at the same time the small scale, because it's the scale of the life. And the large scale is also the result of how the small scale is working well. So for us, this principle of from inside out is extremely important. Social means relation between people, and architecture is really the heart of the relation between people, the space, creating space for use and for relations. It's a sense of architecture. So of course it is at the heart of the society. It's why it's important to think architecture as as a service of people, of a society, and especially for housing. Housing is what is the most important and the most necessary for everyone. So in France we work a lot with public social housing or public housing, because social, in fact, we don't really care, we make public housing. And it's very important because we have the feeling that only the public can take care of the affordability of housing for everyone. And it's probably one of, nowadays, one part of the problem is most of the housing now are made by the private development. And where is housing is always a kind of result of a vision of how a society is, where a society is going, and how a society is going, and it's a kind of common ground. And how could we ask to private investors to have this vision? This is not their role. So for us, it's extremely important that some important parts of architecture, public space, should come only for a public decision. I think it's very difficult to advise because ourselves we are not always sure about. We have still a lot of doubts, and it's good to have doubts and to ask always questions. But probably we could recommend that they really first that they feel well with what they are doing, that they feel in line with what how as person, as citizen, as architects, how we can mix all this in the same attitude. That's very important for us to be in line on all these parts of our personality, and also that it's important to be also in line with our contemporary society, to try to understand what is expected from the architects. It's right that, of course, the expectations are not the same coming from politicians, coming from some big companies who are doing head office, or from the people. But we feel closer to people than from all this. In short, we recommend that they should think architecture not as a representation, but much more as really spaces for the life, any use, with possibility of freedom of use for everyone. So we could encourage them to think architecture in this way, and not as a kind of product, or even if at the end of course we produce architecture, we produce objects, we use materials. It's the aesthetic is there, but it's not the heart of the question. It's important that all this starts from a strong intention, strong position towards people, towards inhabitants, towards in general our surrounding society.
Isn't that a dream, to have this one iconic building and everybody would know your name?
No, not really, no. I guess that Hudson didn't make the Opera House in Sydney just for being recognized. It did it as he wanted to do it, and then it became an icon of architecture. I'm not sure that really the great architects are thinking to that when they are doing when they are designing projects. it becomes after. It's also a fact of our society to transform everything in icons, in medias, but it may change also. It remains that good buildings from good architects remain good buildings in the history, and that's the most important.